Are we ready to go, Crystal?
We're ready.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to our third seminar in our ADA 30th anniversary series. Today we've got Mr. Roger Robb from the Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, who's going to be doing working with deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, and deaf blind citizens. My name is Jordan Vargas. I am the Title II ADA coordinator for the city of Albuquerque. So what that means is I work with our different departments to work on ADA accessibility, both physically and programmatically. I also work with our constituency to make sure that when there's any accessibility issues that I'm working with whatever city department and that individual to work on that accessibility. Today on our meeting, we also have Ms. Tori Jacobus, and she is the director of our Office of Civil Rights. I'm going to go ahead and let her introduce herself and tell you guys a little bit about that office.
Hi, good afternoon. As Jordan said, I am Tori Jacobus. I run the Office of Civil Rights here at the city, and Jordan and I collaborated to bring you this 30th anniversary of the ADA series of community sessions. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. The Civil Rights Office here at the city of Albuquerque mirrors portions of the Federal Civil Rights Act, the New Mexico Human Rights Act, the ADA, and several other pieces of federal and state civil rights legislation. The Human Rights Ordinance prohibits discrimination in housing, places of public accommodation, and employment. And the classes of people who it protects are race, color, religion, sex, national origin or ancestry, age, disability, and then a catch-all for any other unlawful discrimination, which means anything else that's protected under another law. Our office works to help educate people about discrimination. We can do that in one-on-one sessions or groups. We accept complaints, which may lead to investigations where discrimination has occurred, and we also provide technical assistance. If you are interested in learning more about our office, please call us at 505-768-4595. Again, that's 505-768-4595. I'll put that in chat, and I'm going to turn it over to Roger now to share with us today. Thank you all again.
Thank you, Jordan and Tori. Today's presentation will be talking about how to work with individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, and deafblind. Our hope is that this presentation will help you understand how to better serve our community. My name is Roger Robb. I'm the Community Education Specialist with the State of New Mexico Commission for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And I really have three parts of my job. I do several presentations, like what you will see today. And I do presentations all over the state of New Mexico. Of course, right now with coronavirus, I can't go out and do presentations in person right now. So we're changing our approach a little bit to do them over webinar. I also do a lot of systemic advocacy. I work with a variety of agencies, organizations, and businesses to ensure that they comply with the ADA. I also create a lot of vlogs on our website. I've made several vlogs recently specific to coronavirus with information that is not necessarily accessible to those who use sign language. We also add captions to those videos so that if someone who is deaf but doesn't know sign language wants access to that information, they can watch those videos. And now I'll go ahead and begin with my presentation. I always like to start my presentation with a picture. Just one moment here. Let me make sure I can change that picture. I see it on my end, but the interpreter is telling me that she's not seeing it on hers. So give me just one moment and I will see if I can make that change real quick. Just one moment here while I figure out these slides. I think I may have it here, just a second. Okay, we think we got the PowerPoint figured out, but now I can't see the interpreter. Okay, great. Whew. I feel better now. We've got this. I'm so sorry about those technical difficulties. All right. So now that I have the picture up, it's a picture of 3 boys of different statures who are receiving the same services, so to speak. They're all watching a baseball game. And you can see clearly the shortest boy can't see the game at all. He's blocked by a fence. And so he's missing out on everything that happens. In relation to my world as a deaf person, I would be like the shortest boy. All auditory information is inaccessible to me. The tallest boy who can see over the fence would be like those of you who can hear and you can trade information auditorily. The boy in the middle who can see a little bit would be like someone who is hard of hearing. They can hear some information, but they also miss out on some auditory information as well. I have a second picture on the screen now with accommodations. We have some boxes that the boys can stand on while they're watching the game. For my perspective as a deaf person, this would be like having a sign language interpreter, having captions available. If there's a stage performance, having an interpreter on stage. At a movie theater, having captioned glasses. That shows an accessibility for me. And this third picture here shows what we would call our dream world. There's a chain link fence, so now all the barriers have been removed. In this situation, I wouldn't need to ask for an interpreter or ask for someone to turn the captions on because the information is already accessible. And this is something that I hope for, I hope to see in our world. People with a hearing loss are considered to have an invisible disability, which means you don't know that a person has a hearing loss necessarily. If I go into a grocery store, people will start talking to me sometimes, and they may think that I'm ignoring them when I don't respond. But that's not it at all. It's just that I can't hear what they're saying. They don't know that I'm deaf until I start signing, in which case they could make accommodations if needed. But hearing loss is invisible in that you don't know someone has a hearing loss until they ask you to speak louder or indicate to their ear or begin asking for communication to happen more effectively. I have a picture on the screen here that's a room full of people. Normally, when I do this presentation in person, I ask if someone can tell me of at least one deaf person in the picture. And most of the time, I get an answer that says no, or it might be that one person. It might be that boy who is looking down on the lower right-hand corner. He's a popular guess because he's not facing the same way as everyone else. And really, that's a good answer, but it's not the truth. This picture was taken in a room full of deaf people at a deaf event. However, you wouldn't be able to tell that, right? Because in this picture, no one is signing. It would be easy to overlook the hearing loss in this room. Now I'd like to talk about identities included under the term hearing loss. We have deaf. And when I'm doing a presentation in person, I usually ask for participants to give me their best guess as to what deaf means. But on a webinar, it's a little bit harder to get that back and forth. So I will actually go ahead and give those definitions as I go. Deaf means someone who cannot hear. I do have to give a word of warning that this can be a little bit tricky though, because there are two identities under that identity of deaf. Those who are culturally deaf, who use American Sign Language, and another group who are deaf but who do not use American Sign Language. They're also known as oral deaf. And those two groups have different communication needs. The culturally deaf group needs a sign language interpreter. The oral deaf group needs a different kind of accommodation. They may need captioning services. They may need to lip read. So if someone comes into your place of business and says, I'm deaf, the best approach would be to ask, what are your communication needs? That way the person can let you know, I need an interpreter, or I would like a pen and paper. I can lip read. It's always best to ask, because if someone says, I'm deaf, and you say, hold a moment, let me get an interpreter, and go through that process of finding an interpreter, but that deaf person doesn't know sign language, it's not an effective use of your organization's time or funding, because you do have to pay for interpreters when they're scheduled, whether you use them or not. So it's always important to ask, what are your communication needs? If they need an interpreter, you can begin the process of booking one. The next category we have are deafblind individuals. These are people who cannot hear and who have a range of vision loss. There are really multiple identities under the category of deafblind. It could be someone like Helen Keller, who was completely deaf and completely blind, who would use tactile signing as a way to communicate. We also have deafblind individuals who have a range of vision loss. When I say that, I mean that there are some who can see up close, who would need to track someone signing, which means hold on to their wrists as they're signing, so that they can keep their eyes tracked in that close range. There are also deafblind individuals who have Usher's syndrome, which means they have tunnel vision. They can see in a portion of their field of vision and the rest is black. In which case, if you were up close with that person, they wouldn't be able to see you signing. So you would need to back further away so that your hands were signing in that tunnel of vision. Deafblind could also refer to someone who is orally deaf, meaning that you would need to write in large letters. So it's very important to ask someone who is deafblind what their communication needs are. They may be completely deaf and completely blind, but be orally deaf, which means that sign language would not be effective, in which case you would need to improvise writing on the palm of their hand, for example, or using Braille, a text-to-Braille sort of machine. There are several different ways that you can accommodate those communication needs with someone who is deafblind. The next group we have is hard of hearing. These are people who have the ability to hear some depending on the frequency of the sound. So they do struggle with some frequencies. We also have late deafened, which means someone who was born with the ability to hear and later lost their hearing for whatever reason. It could be someone who was in combat, or a teenager who listened to a lot of loud music. Senior citizens are a good example of those who are late deafened. As they become older, their hearing tends to reduce. And I'm sure that some of you here today have a spouse or significant other who has selective listening. I know I do. And lastly, here we have speech disabled, which refers to someone who has a hard time speaking for whatever reason. It may be that they have damage to their voice box, that they had to have their larynx removed because of cancer or another illness, a traumatic injury to the throat. In the deaf community, we do not consider ourselves speech disabled. Even though we cannot speak, speech disabled is more of a medical perspective. Growing up, I went to a school for the deaf, and I had many hours of speech therapy. And honestly, it didn't do a whole lot of good for me. The sad thing is that I am able to speak cuss words pretty well. But that's about it. So now I would like to talk about labels and giving hearing loss a name. The 3 words on the screen here are words that the deaf and hard of hearing community does not like. These are not appropriate. when I hear these terms, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. And honestly, I'm sure many of you watching are surprised to see these. It's hearing impaired. People often think that hearing impaired is appropriate, but honestly, it is not. That term is not acceptable in any way to the deaf and hard of hearing community. And we know that it is used quite frequently. It's used everywhere. And when we hear or see that word, it's a real struggle not to cringe. The reason behind that is that hearing impaired emphasizes something needs to be fixed. But we don't see ourselves as needing fixing. I, as a deaf person, am able to function perfectly well. I can drive a car. I can drive pretty well. Every once in a while, you might see a deaf person who looks away to chat with someone else in the vehicle. Maybe then they're not such a great driver. But in general, deaf drivers are really good because they use their eyes to see what's on the road. We can function well in life. We just need some accommodations. So that's the reason that hearing impaired is not really an appropriate term. It comes more from that attitude of impairment and needing something to be fixed. So we ask that you don't use that word. Instead, please use hard of hearing, capital D deaf, lowercase d deaf, and speech disabled. Capital D deaf and lowercase d deaf look very similar. They are different. The capital case D refers to someone like myself who is culturally deaf, uses American Sign Language. And people who are culturally deaf usually have gone to a school for the deaf growing up. The lowercase d deaf refers to those who are oral deaf. Someone who doesn't fit the idea of culturally deaf and who doesn't use American Sign Language, but also who is not able to hear. We would refer to them as the lowercase d deaf. And this can also be a hint to you if you're riding back and forth with a deaf individual and you see them use a capital D deaf, it is most likely they will request an interpreter. But again, you can't assume that. It's always best to be safe rather than sorry and ask, what are your communication needs? I do want to emphasize that the capital D and the lowercase d does not show any kind of superiority. It only helps us understand the different communication needs of the two groups, that there are different needs for each. I also forgot to let you know that if you have any questions during this webinar, please go ahead and ask them at any time. You do not need to hold them to the end. Okay, moving on here. I'd like to talk about language. On the screen, I have 3 languages here: English, Spanish, and American Sign Language, also known as ASL. And I'll give an example of each. In English, you would say, I have a red car. That's how it's written and spoken in English. It follows the rules, grammar, and structure of an English sentence. And actually here I have to admit, I failed English class. You can see I didn't put a period on the end of my sentence. But English is also not my first language. American Sign Language is. So there's that. In Spanish, you would say, tengo un coche rojo, which would translate to, I have a car red. But that is appropriate in Spanish. It follows the grammar, rules, and structure of a Spanish sentence. In American Sign Language, I would sign red car, me have. And if you look at this written, it looks like broken English, but it's not. American Sign Language is not a written language. It does not have a written form. It is a visual language. So red car I have is appropriate in ASL. You'll also see that I don't use punctuation. There's no period at the end of my American Sign Language sentence because we don't have that punctuation in American Sign Language. Things like exclamation points, question marks, periods are expressed through our facial grammar, meaning how we move our eyebrows and face. So if I have a pause in my sentence, you'll see me lean forward. That would be like having a period at the end. If there's an exclamation point, you'll see excitement on my face. It will be clear that I'm excited. If there's a question, I might make a face like this. This tells you, wait a moment, I have a question. So our facial expressions take the place of that punctuation in American Sign Language. If you're working with someone who is deaf, who also signs, writing may not be the best approach. Many deaf individuals can read and write at a 3rd grade level. And if you have in-depth questions, it would be best to make different accommodations for that individual. In that case, writing back and forth may become a challenge. Now I would like to talk about deaf behavior. Specifically, how someone who is deaf will get a person's attention, or how to get a deaf person's attention. It may include waving, like so. Now, you won't see us do it this way. See how my hand is right in front of my face? Very close. We'll wave further out in space. Some people confuse the ability to see with the ability to hear, and sometimes think that we won't be able to see them waving from further away. But as someone who is deaf and not deaf-blind, I am able to see from further distances, so waving in space would be appropriate. Deaf people tend to be very touchy people, but I will say that we know what is appropriate. If I do need to touch someone, it will only be on the shoulder or upper arm here. In this space, just on the upper arm or the shoulder. We will not touch a person anywhere else, like their head, their chest, face, anywhere else we know is inappropriate. Just on the upper arm. But I would suggest not using touch to get someone's attention if you're coming from behind, because someone who can't hear will likely not know that anyone is there. And that touch will be very frightening. You might give someone a heart attack that way. We may also tap on a table, because deaf people can feel those vibrations moving through the table. You won't see us pounding on tables, though, unless, of course, we're upset. That may be for whatever reason. If a deaf person, for example, got a ticket for not using a face mask, they may be upset. and pound on the table and say, I don't want to pay $100. That's just an example. Some deaf people will use their voice to yell for attention, but that sound will not be a word. Like I said, growing up, I received many hours of speech therapy, and I still don't use my voice. It's the same for many deaf community members. So they may yell something that to them means like, hey, but it won't come out sounding like, hey. It will just be some sort of noise. If you hear that, don't be startled. It's just us trying to get your attention. If you have a question for someone who is deaf, don't be surprised if that person gives you a very long and detailed response. You may need only a little bit of information and not need everything that they're telling you. But 90% of deaf individuals are born into families who can hear, meaning that growing up, a lot of us don't have the opportunity to express ourselves. So when we have the opportunity to tell a story, we will tell it to you in full. It is appropriate to say, I just need this specific information, or to interrupt and say, thank you, that was the information I needed. And you have seen me using a lot of facial expression here today. For those who speak and use your voice, you use inflection. If you're angry, your voice goes up. If you're sad, your voice goes down. If you're happy, your voice may go all over the place. For those of us who are deaf, we can't hear that inflection, so we use facial expression to express those same emotions. If I'm angry, my eyebrows will go down and my signing will be a lot larger and faster. If I'm feeling sad, you can see my eyes are down and I'm signing in a smaller space. If I'm very happy, you'll see that on my face as well, and my signing will be larger. If you are working with someone who's deaf and you notice that they are nodding along with what you're saying, it does not always mean yes or an agreement. That's how we show that we're listening and we understand what you're saying. It does not always mean that we understand the concept behind what you're saying. It just shows that we're paying attention. If you need a yes response, or if you ask someone, do you understand? And you see them nodding, that does not indicate a yes. And if it's any kind of official paperwork, that will not hold up in court. You will need the deaf person to sign the word yes to show their agreement. So I do want to emphasize that the nod does not mean agreement or that they understand. Signing in a large space very quickly indicates that we are under stress. It shows that we're upset, but it does not necessarily show aggression or that the individual is out of control in any way. So I do want to be clear with that. It only shows that we're under stress if the signing is in a large space like this. Or it may be that we're desperately trying to get someone's attention for something. Aggressive behavior would be a stance that changes like this, getting in someone's face. But signing quickly in a large space is different. So I do want to emphasize that. I'd like to talk about different modes of communication now. There's, of course, sign language as one way. There's also lip reading for those who are oral deaf or hard of hearing. If you're in a room with a lot of background noise, it may be difficult for someone who's hard of hearing to hear the words that you're using, so they may choose to lip read instead. You can also use writing back and forth. As I mentioned previously, writing back and forth is good for short and simple discussions, but it does need to be simple. For those things that are going to require a more in-depth conversation, you will likely need to get an interpreter. You can also use your phone to text back and forth. I do that often if I'm going to go to a fast food restaurant. Let's say I want to get some McDonald's, or I'd like to go to Blake's. I'll usually type my order on my phone so that I can show it to them when I get up to the window or the counter. If there's not an interpreter available, you don't have pen and paper, you don't have a phone that can text, you can use gesture or pantomime. If I do this, it means that I'm hungry. Or if I'm gesturing like this, it means where is the restroom? So you can use gesture. And some people will be able to pick up on that and understand what you're meaning. Others will not. I had one experience where I went to a fast food place. I won't mention the name, but I had gone in and I motioned to my ear and made a gesture like a piece of paper and a pen. And the person behind the counter was very confused. So again, I gestured to my ear and said, I can't hear, I need a pen and paper. And the person started frantically waving a coworker over. They were not sure what to do. So I learned my lesson. Now I have my phone or I have a pen and paper ready to give my order. Always feel free to ask, what can I do to make our communication more successful? Most of the time, we will be ready to let you know what we need. There are some people who won't automatically tell you what their accessibility needs are. And I am positive that none of you here today know how to read minds, right? So if someone doesn't tell you what their needs are, you can ask, how can we communicate better? Is pen and paper effective? Will this work? You can use gesture as well to ask. And each situation is different. For example, if I am in a traffic stop, an officer pulls me over, and I tell them I'm deaf, does that mean that the officer automatically needs to get an interpreter? My answer to that is no. Because to get an interpreter, he would have to call dispatch, request an interpreter, then dispatch would need to contact an agency that hires interpreters. The agency would need to find an interpreter who is available and then get that interpreter on site. It could take 1 to 2 hours. And of course, I don't want to sit in my car for 2 hours waiting for an interpreter to come on site. And so in a situation like a traffic stop, we can make writing back and forth work. But if for whatever reason an officer needed to interrogate me, if I was under arrest, I would need a sign language interpreter. because for a situation like that, I will not be able to write back and forth effectively. I do have a good grasp of the English language as my second language, but for that, it would be good to have a sign language interpreter. And of course, if I was under arrest, I would be very nervous. And I would have a difficult time processing information. So a sign language interpreter would be the best accommodation. In American Sign Language, we do have some signs that do not have an English equivalent. For example, there's a sign that looks like this. Now that's a word in American Sign Language that usually refers to someone's tendency, how someone usually acts, but it doesn't have an equivalent word in English. So an interpreter would be able to see this word, know what it meant, and be able to communicate that effectively. It is always a good idea to state the topic of discussion beforehand. I'll explain why in a little bit. For those who wear hearing aids, they do lose their effectiveness after 6 feet apart. For coronavirus, we know that social distancing best practices right now is to maintain a 6-foot distance. For those who are hard of hearing, the further someone is, the harder it is for their hearing aid to be able to pick up what's being said. And masks also make it harder to hear. So current situations really reduces the effectiveness of communicating with someone who's hard of hearing. There's been a lot of discussion in our community on Facebook and different places of where to find face shields or clear masks for people to be able to read lips still while being protected. If a person is deaf or hard of hearing, know that they may struggle to communicate while wearing a mask. In which case, it may be that you need to use your phone with larger writing to communicate back and forth. You'll have to try your best to see what works to get that message across. Speak slowly and clearly, but do not yell or exaggerate your speaking style. If you yell, I still won't be able to hear you. I'm sorry, you might lose your voice. And an exaggerating speaking style, if you're moving your lips largely, it looks silly, right? You can speak normally. I have a picture here on the screen that you can see of someone who's backlit. You'll want to avoid that because it would be impossible to lip read this person. It would also be impossible to see them signing as well. As someone who is deaf, I try to have the light source shine in front of me instead of from behind. If an officer were to pull me over at night and shine a flashlight into my vehicle and speak, I wouldn't be able to see what they were saying. And I'll let them know that. If someone who is hard of hearing or oral deaf gets pulled over, they won't be able to see that at all and not be able to cooperate with what the officer is asking of them. So it would be important for the officer to shine a light on their own face while they're speaking and move that light back and forth depending on who's talking at the moment. It is okay to repeat what you've said once. When you said it the first time, it may be that the person wasn't paying attention, but don't say the exact same phrase over and over, because that person still will not may not be able to understand you. It would be best to rephrase instead of becoming frustrated by saying the same thing. You can also use body language or facial expression to help in your communication. Like I said before, every situation is different, and you'll just have to work with the person who has a hearing loss to see what is best. You'll also want to choose an environment that is conducive to effective communication. If the room is dark, it will be difficult for someone to be able to see signs or lip movements. Some people who can hear think that we could use tactile signing in the dark, but that wouldn't actually be effective for those who are not deafblind. It takes many years of practice to understand tactile signing. It's very difficult. So you'll want to find a room that is bright enough, but of course not too bright. We are just like you. We want to work with someone who is patient, positive, and relaxed. If you're not patient and you don't want to work with someone, it makes it harder. It's the same thing for those of us who are deaf. Be careful with your facial expressions. Those of us who are deaf use visual cues much more. We use our eyes and we notice things, even subtle facial expressions. If someone is rolling their eyes, that says a lot. And you may not even realize it because we're much more visually aware of those things. It is important not to say, it's nothing, never mind, it's not important. It makes us feel belittled. A good example from my own life is that I grew up in a hearing family. I'm the only deaf person. And there was one time that I saw a couple of my family members chatting back and forth, and they were giggling and laughing. And of course, being nosy, I wanted to know what's so funny. So I asked, and they told me, oh, it's nothing. It's not anything. Never mind, don't worry about it. And that really hurt. I felt like I missed out. Whether it's important or not important in your eyes, it's all important to us. People who can hear get information through incidental learning and overhearing things. We who are deaf don't have that opportunity, so it's important to take time to communicate. And it's a fact of life that it does take time. Don't ignore or avoid interaction. There are some people who feel flustered when trying to communicate with someone who's deaf. They don't know how to handle those situations. And if that's you, that's totally fine. But it's important to find someone else who is more comfortable trying to communicate. Don't just leave us hanging. If I go to Target or I go to Walmart, there's sometimes where I'll see something out of stock on the shelf and it's something that I need. So I'll find an employee and let them know I'm deaf and that I need pen and paper, and they'll walk off. And I'll stand there waiting for a while to come back. I don't know if they've gone to check the stock in the back or not. And there have been times where they haven't come back, it's been a while, so I'll walk around and I'll see them helping someone else. and it feels like, all right, well, I can see that you don't value my business. It's important that you take time to find someone who is willing to help and communicate with us, even if you yourself are not comfortable with it. You may meet someone who has a co-occurring disability. For example, someone who has a hearing loss and a vision loss. I think there are about 30 deafblind individuals who live in the city of Albuquerque. So it is possible that you will meet one someday, or maybe meet someone with a hearing loss. Many of you have already had an encounter with someone who has hearing loss. The tips that I have shared with you will help reduce those communication barriers with someone who also has a vision loss as well. But here's some extra tips. Proximity becomes very important. I know that right now with coronavirus, there are some deafblind individuals who need to hold on to someone's wrists to track what they're saying, which makes a 6-foot social distance impossible. In which case that person will use gloves and a mask to protect everyone. You should also use gloves and a mask to protect yourself. And when you're done talking with that person, you'll want to remove your gloves and wash your hands. If you have some sort of document, some sort of paper, if you need writing, it's important to write in large capital letters for someone to be able to see it clearly. There are some people who do need Braille to communicate. If there is a deafblind person who needs you to use a machine that turns text to Braille, please wear gloves while using that machine to protect both yourself and the deafblind person. Any pictures that you reference or point to will need to be explained. Many pictures are in 2D and don't have any sort of 3D feel to them, which means they'll have to be explained. For my PowerPoint today, I do have an alternative text version for those any people who are watching this presentation that has descriptions of the pictures so that they can be included as well. We want to make sure that everyone is included. We don't want to exclude any group. So now I'd like to talk about speech reading, and keep this in mind. Please be sure that you don't have anything blocking your mouth. If a person who's lip reading is unable to see your mouth, they won't be able to lip read you. Or if you're chewing on gum, that also makes it difficult, right? Watching someone chew on gum, you can't read those lips at all. Or sunflower seeds. That's happened before, someone chewing on some sunflower seeds and talking. It's very difficult to see the words on those lips clearly. There are some people who are very good at multitasking. These people usually have a pen somewhere near their mouth like this. Please put that pen down before you start talking. and speak without moving your head from side to side. It would be like having to try to track someone with a spotlight moving around. It's very difficult to see those lips. And for those who are oral deaf who do rely on lip reading, for example, in school, having a teacher turn to write on a whiteboard while still talking makes it impossible to lip read. So it's important to make sure that the person who's trying to lip read you can see your lips clearly. I do have a beard, so I'm always careful to trim around my lips to be sure that you can still see them. Right now, with people using face masks, honestly, it is impossible to lip read through those. So you'll want to be careful that people can see you clearly. And again, you'll want to make sure to have good lighting, that you're not backlit, that it's not too dark or too bright. Now, I will give you a word of caution. Don't ask a deaf person, can you read lips? The reason being, only approximately 30% to 35% of the English language is visible on the lips, making the rest a guessing game. So now my interpreter is going to mouth 3 words, but she's not going to use her voice at all. And I would like each of you to try to lip read what she's saying. She will say it twice, and then I'll give the answer for all 3 of those. All right, number 1. Before I tell you the answer, any guesses as to what that is? The answer is baby. Now for the second word. It is not baby. We used that for the first one. The answer is maybe. Maybe. And now for our last word. When I give this presentation in person, I usually have people yelling out the answer, and no one ever guesses this last one. It is pay me. So for someone who is deaf, those 3 words, baby, maybe, pay me, all look the same on the lips. It makes it impossible to lip read effectively. That's why previously I said that it would be a good idea to state the topic of discussion. That will help those who do lip read eliminate words as they go through that process of trying to guess which word was said. For myself, forget it. The only sentence that I absolutely can lip read and understand is, can you read lips? The reason being that people have asked me that thousands of times in my life. And I already know my answer will be no. Even though I do know that one sentence, my answer is no, I can't read lips. So please don't ask a deaf person, well, can you just read lips? Because their answer will likely be no. Tonight, as you're watching your favorite TV show or a movie, I suggest that you turn the sound off. And don't turn on captions, because that would be cheating. And try to lip read what the characters are saying. And you'll see that it is not an easy task. Thank God we have a sign language interpreter here today, right? if not for our interpreter, you would have to rely on the captions. But then the captions wouldn't work because you wouldn't have anyone speaking in English. I'd just be sitting here waving my hands. We'd have people typing in the chat that I can't understand what this guy's saying, and poor Jordan trying to organize a presentation that's not effective. It would be a mess. So thank God that we have Jessica here today, who's interpreting for us. So when you're using a sign language interpreter, speak directly to the deaf person, not to the interpreter. You'll also want to make eye contact with the deaf person, and again, not the interpreter. Because really, the deaf person is the one that you're speaking to. The interpreter is only there to facilitate that information. It is important that you don't tell the interpreter, tell him that it costs, there's a $100 fine to not wear a face mask. You would want to speak directly to the person and say, it's a $100 fine if you don't wear your face mask. If you only speak with the interpreter, if you're making eye contact with the interpreter, it makes us feel disconnected from that conversation. However, I or the deaf person will be looking at the interpreter to see what the response is. So you'll see us looking back and forth between you and the interpreter. And I know that it's very strange at first to make eye contact with someone who's not speaking, using their voice to speak, but you'll get used to it. The interpreter may also give you information related to language, culture, or the environment. However, they are not permitted to participate in the conversation. When my presentation is over, people usually have a lot of questions for the interpreter, and they'll want to ask my interpreters a lot of questions. But my interpreter is working. So when something is over, the interpreter is not necessarily off the clock. Excuse me, when the interpreter is off the clock, when something is finished and you have questions specific for the interpreter, then they'd be more than happy to share that information. But while they're working, they would need to relay that question and information to me. So often my interpreter will sign to me, how long does it take to become an interpreter? In which case I can let that person who has a question know, the interpreter is working currently, you can ask that question later. It's a sign of respect. The interpreter is there to work and to interpret. And I'm sure that you have noticed that the interpreter is a little bit behind my signing. Sometimes I will stop moving my hands and my interpreter is still speaking. The reason is the interpreter has to watch my sign language, then take that in, process it mentally, change it into English, and then speak that interpretation. And so as I'm signing, I'll often pause and check in with the interpreter to make sure that she's on track before I continue. And, you know, the interpreter may be making me sound better than I really am. Who knows? Speak clearly and at your normal pace. If the interpreter is falling behind, they'll let you know. They'll ask you to repeat information. They'll let you know where information got lost in the sentence. Or they may ask you to slow down. But you do not have to ask the interpreter, am I speaking too fast? Just speak at your normal, everyday pace, and things should go very smoothly. Interpreters are trained to handle that pace of communication. If you need to get an interpreter for whatever reason, it is important that you let the interpreting agency that you're working with know what you need an interpreter for. Is it for an interview? Do you have questions? Is it for someone who is deafblind? Is it someone who has minimal English skills, minimal language skills? Someone who uses Mexican Sign Language, which is also known as LSM, which would mean that the interpreting agency would need to find the right interpreter to match whatever situation you need the interpreter for. Interpreters do have specialized training. So there are interpreters who are trained specifically for legal work, interpreters who have mental health training, interpreters who have worked for law enforcement, those who work in education and the school environment. There are those who are trained specifically in how to work with those who are deafblind and are more familiar with that process of tracking or tactile interpreting. That's also very important for someone to know beforehand, because having someone track your sign would need to have 2 interpreters, because those hands on top of someone's hands who are signing do become very heavy. So you'll want to have interpreters who are able to switch out to take a break. So you wouldn't want to get an interpreter who has been trained to work in K through 12 education to then interpret in a court setting. Because of course the court has their own processes, their own jargon, which means that you would need the right interpreter for that situation. And I do need to let you know that there is a difference between a certified and licensed interpreter and someone who knows sign language. You can see on the screen I have the differences here between an interpreter and a signer. A certified interpreter has a professional credential. They follow a code of professional conduct. They've been trained and they have a certification. Their role is as an interpreter. They also know deaf culture. A family member or a signer does not have that training or those credentials. In times previously, my mom would be the one who interpreted for me at a doctor's appointment. This was quite a while ago. I'm old, okay? I know I don't look old. Got my youthfulness still, but I am. Anyway, so just as an example, this did not happen to me, but let's say I went to a doctor and my mom was my interpreter, and the doctor said, Roger, your test results came back and you tested positive for herpes. Well, then if my mom was the interpreter, what's the first thing that she's gonna do? She's gonna be a mom, not my interpreter. She'll smack me upside the head and say, Roger, you slept with someone? And that would be quite embarrassing for me. That would be my private information. In which case, you need to have an interpreter come in who is just an interpreter. Because, you know, if my mom was interpreting after the appointment, there's nothing that would stop her from calling my sister, my aunt, my grandma, any family member and be saying, hey, guess what? Roger just came back from the doctor and he was diagnosed with herpes. Again, that's my private information. So having a certified licensed interpreter means that that information remains confidential. And even if someone said, hey, I heard that you were interpreting for Roger at a doctor's appointment, what happened? The interpreter is not allowed to say anything about that. It's not their business. They respect our privacy. So you will want to have a certified licensed interpreter. Do not use a deaf person's children or family members to interpret unless it is a life or death situation. Especially for children, they are often not skilled with the level of vocabulary that would be used. They won't understand what's being said, and then they won't be able to interpret that information. My husband can hear. I will never, never, never use him to interpret for me, because his expressive skills for signing are not the same as what an interpreter's would be. So for him to interpret for me, there would be a lot of confusion. I'd have to ask him to repeat a lot. He might give me the wrong information accidentally. I would need an interpreter. Now, if it is a life or death situation, that's the only time that you would be able to use a family member as an interpreter, if you needed someone immediately in that moment. But for anything in depth, it would also be very difficult. There used to be a time that family members would interpret at a family event. Let's say a Christmas party or a birthday party. The family member is already in the home, so they may go ahead and interpret. But unless there is some serious information, let's say a family member has 6 months left to live. In that case, you wouldn't want a family member to interpret that. So each situation is different. It is illegal to interpret in the state of New Mexico without a license. You can see the statute number here. If you do interpret without a license and are caught, you face 364 days in jail and or a $1,000 fine. Now, this does only apply to sign language interpreters, not to foreign spoken language interpreters, like a Spanish interpreter. They have different standards. So this is for sign language interpreters. That is why it's vital to have a certified, licensed interpreter. And how do you know if someone has those qualifications? They will have a license that looks like this. Most of the time, interpreters will also have an ID badge that they wear. You are always able to ask, may I see your credentials? To make sure that the interpreter has that licensure. And if that interpreter does not have their ID, they don't have proof, you can report them to the Sign Language Interpreter Practices Board. That's the Sign Language Interpreter Practices Board. And so I can tell you that the interpreter that we have today is certified and she is licensed. So we're not breaking the law. We're good here. All right. So that is the end of my presentation. If you have any questions or you want more information, here's my contact information here on the screen. I do a lot of advocacy, we do in our agency, for those who are deaf, hard of hearing, late deafened, deafblind, and speech disabled. If there are barriers with a job, if there's a doctor's office that doesn't provide interpreters, those are examples of times that we would go in and advocate. We do also have telecommunication equipment. We have a distribution program with a variety of equipment, such as amplified phones, captioned phones, lights that flash if someone's ringing the doorbell, flashing light for an alarm. So if you or a family member would potentially benefit from our services, please contact us. Currently with COVID-19, we are still working. Our staff is working from home though. So you would be able to contact us at cdhh.state.nm.us. There's a tab that says Ask the Expert. You can type your question into there, and that question will get sent to the appropriate department for response. If you would prefer not to call. I do also have a phone number if you would rather give a call that I'm holding up here, 505-383-6530. So please, our services are free. There's no charge. We're funded through the state of New Mexico. So thank you so much for watching. Are there any questions? I also need to check and see what time it is here. Any questions for me?
Hi, Roger. This is Jordan. We do have one question for you. Somebody put in the chat, said this information is incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. I would love to share this information. Will there be handouts or the PowerPoint provided? Again, thank you.
I would be happy to do an outline that I could send out with this information. I would need to discuss with my boss to make sure before I say that I can send anything out specifically. The reason for that being that a lot of times there are people who will give this sort of presentation who can hear. And so we do want to be careful that whatever information is presented is specific to the deaf community. If you do have an agency or an organization that would benefit from our presentation, I would be more than happy to give one for you. Right now, because of COVID, we're doing them through webinar. When things get back to normal, I do plan to go in person to give a presentation with an interpreter.
Okay, great. Thank you, Roger. And we also have one more person asking, I talk with my hands a lot. Is that good or bad?
You know, if someone is able to understand you, then that's perfectly fine. It's important not to, how do you say, use your gesture as if you know sign language, or to use it in a pretend or mocking way. That would be offensive, because that's not a conversation. That's really making fun of the language. So that sort of like mocking thing is not appropriate. But if you talk with your hands, or you're using a lot of gesturing, if you do know some signs, that's totally appropriate. If you need somebody to stop, you know, you can gesture stop, or that it's time to go, you can totally do that. That is okay.
Thank you, Roger. Do we have any further questions? Oh, we do have one more question. It says, once long ago, I was given a deaf nickname, which was a certain sign. Are nicknames / signs specific to deaf communities?
It is. We do have sign names. For example, my sign name looks like this. That's Roger. The reason being there are 3 R's in my name. So it looks like R3 in sign language. So that's Roger. The interpreter's sign name looks like long hair braided with the initial J. The reason being previously she did have long hair and her name is Jessica. So someone who was culturally deaf can give a sign name. It's not appropriate to have someone who is hearing and can sign give a sign name because that is something that is culturally deaf. But the thing is that a lot of times there's so many names. There may be a few people who have the same name sign. And that can be pretty common. I know 3 deaf friends who have the same name sign. So of course, it would be important to say who it was, the first and last name, before using that name sign. So then I would know which friend it was that we were talking about. So then it's not like, oh, I thought you were talking about the other one. Oh, you meant that person. Oh, gotcha.
Thank you, Roger. Do we have any other questions from any of our attendees? All right, Roger, I'm not seeing any additional questions added in. Could you do me a favor and show me your phone number one more time so I can put it in the chat for those that may need it?
Sure. Here it is here.
Okay, is that 3836530? Your screen is really small on my screen.
That is right, yes.
Got it. And not a comment, but I'm sorry, not a question, but a comment. Excellent presentation. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for watching.
Okay, if we don't have any other further questions or if there's nothing else that Mr. Roger would like to mention, I think we can go ahead and wrap up for today.
I don't have any more comments.
Okay, thank you so much, Roger. I really appreciate you and Jessica both taking the time out of your schedules to do a presentation today. And if there are any additional questions that come up after we end our meeting for today, please feel free to send them to me in email. You can go to the website that Roger mentioned. You can contact Roger directly. Whatever is going to be best for you, please feel free to do so. And we hope to see everybody at our next seminar. Thank you so much.